Every .NET developer that works with the web should know how to use Aspire. It is that valuable. But there's also a lot of confusion around Aspire, why it's so valuable, and what it can actually do. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to Aspire, show you why you should use it, and show you how to get started working with this amazing tool. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning software development easier. In a time when AI is capable of doing so much, it's important to have the skills necessary to actually build software. That means not just understanding what to do, but why you should do it and what pitfalls to avoid. These skills are increasingly valuable in today's market. That is what my training provides. I don't just show you how to do something, but I teach you the important context necessary to make informed decisions. If you want more training from me, I offer paid courses at IamTimCorey.com. So let's jump right into Visual Studio. Now, all the source code for this lesson is in the description, a link. It will email it to you. Check that out. So what we're going to do is go to a new project. And we're going to choose the Aspire Starter app. Now, if you don't have Aspire installed, you can go to this website, which I'll link down in the description, but it's on Microsoft's site, and you're looking for a setup and tooling for Aspire, and you can choose .NET CLI, Visual Studio, or VS Code. It doesn't really matter. In fact, probably the CLI is the easiest because you just go to the terminal, but either way, you're going to run this command right here, .NET new install aspire.project templates. Now what it's going to do is it's going to install the latest version of Aspire, which as of the recording of this video is .NET Aspire 9.5. So let's open up this starter app, and again, you have to restart Visual Studio once you install these templates. But let's choose the Aspire demo app. And it's going to create a new folder, and that solution is going to be called Aspire Demo App. And this demo does a lot of stuff. So it's going to give you a good overview of what's possible with Aspire. So it's going to create some sample projects for us. We're hit next. We're going to do .NET 9, which is standard term support. It's configured for HTTPS. The Aspire version is 9.5 that we're going to choose. So we're going to choose to use Redis for our caching. Let's kind of add another wrinkle to this. And I want to make sure we add that wrinkle. We're not going to use unit testing. Don't need to worry about that. But for the rest of this, what it's going to do is create for us a few projects so you can kind of see what Aspire looks like more than just one project, but actually kind of spread out among multiple projects. Now, as you note, this is .NET 9. You can also go back to .NET 8 if you want. So it's not just a .NET 10 thing. It's not just a future thing. This is a today thing that you can do. And again, this is a sample app to show us how to work with Aspire. It's not what you do with your project. We're going to show you how to, talk you through how to add Aspire to an existing project in a bit. But first, let's create. And we're going to see what Aspire is so you can understand why use Aspire. Because that's an important thing. If we're looking at this tool and saying, yeah, it's a new tool, but I don't understand how to use it or when to use it, well, then it's pointless, right? So let's understand what Aspire is first, and then we'll talk through why to use it and why it's so valuable for every .NET developer that's working with any type of web project. And that includes APIs, etc. So this is going to kind of mix what would be your project with Aspire. So this sample project has both what your project might look like as well as Aspire. So let's kind of separate those two out. We're going to minimize these two things right here. And these two projects, API service and the web project, are the two projects that would be kind of representing your existing project. You have a web app, in this case, a Blazor app, and then you also have an API app as well. So we have our Blazor web app, and then we have our API, and we're also using Redis for output caching. So that kind of throws another wrinkle in there. Now, you didn't have to check that box if you didn't want to, but that's going to, again, add a bit more and show you a bit more about Aspire. So that's our existing project. And then there's two projects that are part of the Aspire system. The first is app host. So app host is the project that is going to be the launching point of your application locally. This is all about local development. Now we'll get into more of what it does, but this is really about local development and making our local development story much, much easier, which makes us as developers much, much faster and more efficient. So we have our app host. This is a very simple project that is going to launch our API service and our web service and do a whole bunch more. But the actual project is basically just this. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. We also have the service default project. This project is going to add some service defaults to our web project and our API project. This is actually going to be a dependency that's going to depend, or the API service is going to depend on this service default project. The same as the web. It's going to depend on that. Why? Well, because it's adding a whole bunch of extensions for things you might not be doing. For example, it's adding health checks and it's adding service discovery. We'll come back to that. It's configuring open telemetry for your application. So it's having exporters for open telemetry. There's the health checks right there. They're mapping the endpoints for health checks. So you might be saying, well, I don't understand what those are. Well, it's a great time to learn what those are because those are very valuable for working with applications. So now we have kind of a brief overview of what the different parts of Aspire are. What's the point of this? Well, imagine you didn't have Aspire here. So you only have two projects. You have your web project and your API project, and of course, Redis. Now, in production, you probably have your web app in either Azure Web Apps or Azure Container Services, or even as a separate hosting service somewhere else. Same with your API. And then you have Redis hosted by somebody somewhere, maybe even Redis themselves. But locally, you don't have those things. So locally, what do you do to, for example, get Redis up and running? Well, you'd probably use a container, which is what this is going to do. But then you have to know the Docker command to get a Redis container up, and then you have to put connection string in your web app to say, hey, this is the Redis container locally. So we're going to do that in like user secrets so that only I know how to do that. And then when somebody else installs this project or takes this project down from GitHub, then they have to set up their own Redis container and have to wire that all up. And then you have to know, okay, when I'm launching my web app, it needs to know about the API. And so I have to know what's we go in here into launch settings and figure out, okay, we're going to launch on localhost 7599. So I'll put that in user secrets as well in my web project so I know where the API project is going to be. But then you have to launch two projects. We have to launch the API project and the web project. But we have to put in the right order so the API launches first. Otherwise, the web project might have a problem. And there's a whole bunch of setup stuff going on to get this all working, right? Well, Aspire says, hey, what if we didn't have to do that? What if we didn't have to worry about where the API service is, or didn't have to worry about how to spin up a container for Redis? What if it just kind of worked? And in fact, let's look at the web project in program.cs, where we have our add Redis output cache. We just call it cache. Well, where does that come from? That is part of service discovery. And it's what Aspire allows it to do, where it says, hey, I'll find that for you. And down here, we have the HTTP client for our API. And we say either HTTPS or HTTP. That allows for both options. But I want you to talk to the API service, not localhost 7599. Why? Because it's doing service discovery. It's going to say, hey, you know what? Aspire is going to take care of where that goes. And it will. And now you don't have to worry about where those things are because the service discovery is going to handle that for you. It's going to wire that up, which means that if you clone this repo out of GitHub on a brand new machine, it's going to figure out how to wire up your web project to your API project. It's going to figure out how to spool up a Docker container for Redis and get the connection string to that. All of that is going to be done for you. So taken care of. Now, how does that do that? Well, in the app host, which is the launching project, we have app.host. And in here, notice we have cache equals builder.add Redis, and we call it cache. That's where we got the name cache when down here we said add the output cache called cache. And then we add another project. Notice that reference is the projects dot the API project, and we call it API service. And then over here, we're going to say API service. That knows which one that is. And then it says add health checks to that. And then down here, we say, hey, I want to wire up the web app and call it web front end. I want to add external HTTP endpoints. I want to add health checks. I want to reference the cache. And here's a kicker. I want to wait for the cache. It's going to wait for this cache to be ready before it launches this project. But wait, we're also going to add a reference to the API service, and we're going to wait for that API service to be running. So now we have a hierarchy here of first the cache starts, and then we're going to, and also the API. They can both start at the same time because they're not waiting for anything. But then here on the web front end, we're going to wait for both the cache to be ready and the API service to be ready before we launch the web project. That way we know that things are set up properly. Once all is done, we just run the project. So what's it going to do? It's going to launch the cache, it's going to launch the API, and it's going to wait for both of those. It's going to launch the web front end, and then it's going to launch this host project, which this is a bit different of a project than your normal project. It's not going to launch, let's say, the API and have a browser window pop up and also launch the front end and have a browser window pop up. It's not going to do that. It's going to launch its own project, which is a dashboard. We're going to see that in a minute. So what is this going to do? Let's actually just launch it because this will show us a bit more about why Aspire is so valuable. So I'm going to launch the project. Let's wait for it to start. Here we go. And notice we already have this dashboard up. Where did that dashboard come from? That's the Aspire dashboard. But notice we have an error. Container runtime unhealthy. Container runtime Docker was found, but appears to be unhealthy. Okay, so we need to figure out what's going on with Docker. There's a problem on my computer with Docker. The problem is that I haven't started it. But notice what happens. We have a runtime unhealthy on our cache. We have an API source running because it's not dependent on anything. But then we have a web front end that's waiting. Why is it waiting? It's waiting until it sees that the cache is healthy and the API, which is already running. But once both of those are up, then it's going to launch the web front end. So let me just go ahead and launch the Docker. I'll wait for it to launch. Waiting. Here we go. We're starting the engine. I want to kind of watch behind the scenes. Notice that now it's starting. And notice down here that we have a new container. This is Redis. I didn't do this. I didn't call any commands to set this up. I just have Docker installed on my machine, which is important to have for this setup. But I now have Redis running and it's mapping to a certain port. I don't care because now it knows, well, that's the URL for it. There's a cache running. Now the web front end is running as well. Notice they're all in the green state. We're good. You can even check a graph out if you want to see those connection points and how they work. Notice that the front end connects to both the API and the cache. The API does not connect to the cache. Like you can see this sphere of how things work. So this is the Aspire dashboard. You've probably seen this if you've seen any demos, but you may not have seen all the details of this because this is why it's so valuable. When you are working with systems and resources like this, where it's not just one project that you launch, but multiple, and you have to have those interactions and track what those interactions are and how they work. This right here gives you a great picture of what's going on and allows you to manage and work with the various things they're launching. For example, I could go right to my API here and open this up. And so if I do, well, the API is there. It's just that There's the health. It's healthy because there's nothing on the root endpoint. But that allows you to launch right from here. But this also allows me to see, is there any problems and how do they connect to each other? Right away, just by doing the clone from the repo, you've got a working dashboard that shows you the interactions between your different systems, and whether you have a simple project or a complex project, this gives you more information about how it works in a graphical format that you can look at and understand better. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. So what's important when working with your applications locally? Well, when you're working locally, what you're trying to do is debug things. You're trying to figure out what's going on. Why is it happening? What should I know about the application so I better understand why this bug happens, or if this feature is working properly? Well, this allows you to do that very well, because we do have this, right? We do have the console output window. We can kind of track back through. That's going to track, different applications, what they're doing. And if you're launching manually your API and your web front end, you have two of these. And you're trying to track two of these and kind of compare, that log statement matches up with this log statement, and there's, info logs and more information, but it makes debugging a bit harder. Now, with the Aspire dashboard, you say, you want to look at the log statements? There's all the log statements kind of combined. So this is all the different projects. So API service, cache, and web front end. There's all the different log statements combined, and you can see them in order. So they kind of interleave between the two, all of them. But you can also say, just give me a cache. Okay, so there's the cache information. What the API service? There's the API service. And front end, well, there's the front end. And you can then say, hey, I want to see all of them at once. There you go, and it tells you which one is which. So this allows you to see all your logging at one time. We're going to come back to logging in a bit, but this is a live look at your logs. Now, imagine you have actual logging in your application that is using structured logging. I recommend structured logging. Structured logging is awesome. Well, here's a way to look at it locally. Here's your structured logs. And you might say, well, let's look at this server summary right here. I click on it. And now I have more information about that, including a trace ID, a span ID. I can get information about the language or whatever else was passed in via this log statement, not just a string, not just a message, but all of it. And you can, on any of these, grab these and say, hey, I want to copy that, copy to clipboard. I can also select a format for that if that makes sense to do JSON or XML. So that allows you to see more information about your logging in a structured format and even filter and search. We're going to come back to that because that's a pretty awesome feature. Now, do you know how tracing works? Tracing allows you to see what's going on in your application and track through commands. For example, let's go back to our resource. Let's go to our web front end. We're going to open that up, and we're going to come over here. We're going to hit the counter a few times, and notice that if we go to console log, you'll see a little bit of activity. And if we come over here to traces, you'll see the web front end has some hits on it as well. Okay, so we have that call right here to get counter, and we just got a get command, and boom, that worked, right? Well, let's come back over here and go to weather. And notice it says sweltering at the top, right? We come back, go back here, it still says sweltering. Why? Because we're using caching. Let's go back to our logs, our traces. And down here, we're going to see, we had a hit to the get weather, right? And it says, hey, I want to get weather. And there's the get command. And then we hit the cache. And it says, hey, use that cache. Now, if we go back to our traces and look up here a bit further, we have this get weather where we don't just have cache, like down here we have just cache, but here we have front end cache and API service. Why? Because it wasn't in the cache. So we did a get, we looked at the cache, said, hey, we couldn't find anything. Therefore, we called the actual API. By the way, it took 4.19 milliseconds to make that call. And then we did a set on the cache to set that data in the cache for the next call. And that took 1.41 milliseconds for the overall time, which looks like about 0.15 seconds. Or 150 milliseconds. So that gives you more information about what happens, where the calls are going, where it's failing or where it's not, all the information you want about that interaction that doesn't just live inside of one project, but multiple projects. You have this span of, okay, I'm calling the API. Well, actually, I'm calling the cache first. Nope, it's not in the cache. Now I'm going to call the API. Now I'm going to put this information in the cache. All of those interactions on this very simple application get logged into one trace statement. So you can kind of track through every step along the way and see where there might be problems. So it's going to give you more insights into how your application is working. So trace statements, pretty awesome. We'll actually mess with those a bit in a little bit. We also have metrics. So let's look at our front end. And we have in here a bunch of different things. For example, the duration of requests. But then here's a fun one. SignalR server active connections. We can see if we have any active connections on SignalR. Notice 1. The scale is 1 or 0, basically. But back over here, we can come back to counter, and we'll see, oh, we're back up to 1. And just wait for it to actually scroll over. But we have 1 connection now. This is really helpful for seeing, hey, I'm connecting to multiple browsers. Am I seeing multiple SignalR connections? Hey, when are they dropping off? Why are they dropping off? All that good information you can find out, active requests, etc. Like there's a bunch of information here under metrics that you can kind of track down, figure out what's going on and why. So there's a bunch of information on here that you can dive into. This makes debugging easier. It gives you more information about what's happening between your various services and systems on your local machine. Now, let's cover the $1 million question, and that is, well, how can I deploy this Azure or a Aspire dashboard to my server? You don't want to do that. That's not what this is for. This is for local development, to make local development easier in order to make your life better as a developer, make you more capable of setting this information up or setting these applications up to production in a working order. So that's the goal here. The goal is not to put this into production. This in production would be a bad thing unless you have a lot of security around it, because of the fact that we're doing all of this tracking and tracing and showing what's going on internally. This is all stuff that really should be left in development, not done in production, but at least not done this way. For example, traces, you're still doing traces, you're still doing logging, you're just doing them in a different way. You're putting those behind secure servers. So that might be application insights. It might be other things that you're using, but that's in production. We have all those things in production. What we don't have is a way to replicate that well in development until now. Now we have the Aspire applications that allow us to do those same things we do in production, but on our local machine. So you have a much better picture of what's going on locally, which means we can do more testing and more development locally instead of trying to test in production, which is not a great thing to do. So that's the basics of just getting file new project going in Aspire. Let's make some changes or tweaks here to show off really how valuable it can be. So to do that, what I'm going to do is we're going to make 2 changes. In our web project, we're going to come down to components and pages in counter. And in counter, I'm going to say @inject ilogger of type counter and call it log. And then after our current count, I'm going to say log.log information. And I'm going to create a structured log. So I'm going to say the counter value is, and I'll say count. And then I'm going to say, I'll put comma after here and say current count. Okay. What that'll do is it'll pass the current count into this spot right here and call it count. But let's go a bit further than this. So we're going to say, and the value is even odd result. Not a great name, but is what it is, right? So even odd result. Okay. Now I'm going to, let's shrink this down a bit, and we're going to put this on a new line. And we're going to have a comma, and we're going to put one more value after current count, and that's actually going to be an if statement. So we're going to do current count modulo 2 equals 0. So if it is divide by 2 equals 0, with a remainder equals 0, which essentially means is this even? If it's even, it's going to be 0. Then I'm going to say even, and we're going to say otherwise odd. So this is an inline if statement. I usually don't do these, but this is a good place to do that. We're going to divide the current count by 2, look at the remainder. If the remainder is 0, we're going to say it's even, otherwise we're going to say it's odd. And that goes into the even odd results, which is why I called it that. So let's save this. We're going to do one more change. So this is in the counter app. So every time we hit the increment count, we're going to increment the count, and then we're going to log that with the count and the even odd result. And then over in weather, we're going to break things by saying throw new not implemented exception right after we get the weather async. So that's going to crash the application. That's intentional. So let's run this again. So we have two new things I want to show you in our application. This is kind of showing us how this debugging process might go. So notice starting, running, unhealthy, wait for it, now it's running. So let's launch our web front end, and we're going to go to the counter. We're going to hit that a bunch of times. Let's go 13 times. Now, we're also going to, and let's just take a peek at the log statements first. So we notice here, this is how you might read it in your front end, right? You look at here and go, oh, the counter value is 1, the value is odd, the counter value is 2, and the value is even. That's kind of small to even read, right? But we go to structured logs, and we can still see, oh, the counter value is 1, the value is odd. You can actually open it up. But notice this is where structured logs are so awesome. We now have a new property called count, and the value here is 1. We have an even odd result property, and the value is odd. But even better is we got all these log statements, right? Well, we can filter them. We can say, you know what? I want to see only error logs, which there's no error logs. But we can also come over here to this filter, and we can say, I want to look for, and let's look for the even odd result. And I want to say, I want the even odd result to be, and notice it even gives us options because these are the values it found, 7 odd and 6 even. Let's go to odd. So now I apply the filter, and only those 7 statements show up now in my structured log. And I can see that it's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. In fact, if I come over here and I click it a few more times, now those are showing up as well because, again, my filter is filtering to only where the even odd value is odd. So I can come over here. I can look at this filter and actually change it from odd over to even, which is just a string. And now there's the even values, 2 through 22. So this allows me to better look at my logs, kind of filter down to just what I need, and look at more information about what was happening at that specific time. It allows me to use my logging better. Now let's go ahead and remove all filters. We have those back. Now let's come back over here to our counter and go to the weather page instead, which just says loading. Notice there's no error message here. There's no problem that's being displayed to the user. But if we come over, in fact, we come back to counter, it's back. But if we come over here to our log statements, we can notice that in the structured log, we have an error, we have a warning, and we have an error. So we can figure out what's going on in this error. Unhandled exceptions occurred while executing the request. So we click on that, and there's a bunch of information here. And sometimes people get a little bit lazy and don't actually read all the information. I would encourage you, read all the information. It's important. For example, exception type is not implement exception. The message is the method or operation is not implemented. Now, that should be fairly self-explanatory, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not this specific error, but you're like, why is this exception happening? You have more information to know now about what's going on, but we can also come up here to the GitHub explain errors. Now it's going to use AI, GitHub's Copilot AI. If you don't love that, that's fine, but this is rather helpful. If we click on this, it's going to look at that specific error, and it's going to try and find out more information about the error. Now, I've been having connection problems on my computer, so it may or may not show us all the information about that. I apologize if it doesn't. But I've been having timeouts on GitHub Copilot for some reason. But this will go through and tell you more information about the error, including telling you, hey, this is because you left this type of line in your code. This is a code problem. Go look at line, in this case, whatever line number it is, and it will tell us where that error is and what to do about it, and essentially remove the not implement exception, or make sure you don't forget to implement that that error. So it looks like we're having difficulties here loading. So we'll leave that alone for now. But normally, again, this is my machine problem. It's not everybody's machine problem. Every once in a while I have this problem. I think it's a firewall issue or something. But with that, we also have the ability to go over here into traces, look at more information about it. And let's do that because we'll be able to see that right here, get weather, notice that it has that red exclamation point. There is the problem on this call. And so this trace is going to show you, hey, you know what? This is what you try to do, but here's where you had the problem. Here's what's going on. And here's the result. Now, because all of our services are actually working, all of this actually worked, because we got all the way to the point of being done before we ended up getting the exception. But just note that kind of shows you more information. You can also do explain trace. Again, with GitHub Copilot, you can even go to individual lines and say, ask GitHub Copilot about that. But you can also say, hey, you know what? Show me the structured logs for this. And there's a structured logs for that particular call. Notice there's a filter here. That filter here is the span ID equals. That span ID is the ID that's passed around between services so that we can say, hey, this is all part of one call. And here is all the log statements around that one call. So all saying the API request, we got a 200 back. All this information worked, except we got down here. So we can get more information about this call, what worked, what didn't work, and where the actual problem is by utilizing the Aspire dashboard. So super helpful. Let's go ahead and remove all filters there. But this is why this is such a valuable tool, because even with a couple little demo things, whether it be structured logging on my counter or throwing exceptions in the weather app, we can see how it allows us to very easily track down what's going on. So this is why Aspire is so valuable. Now you might ask the question, yes, but how would I ever get this into my application? Because it seems like it's very complicated. Well, I'll do a separate video entirely probably on wiring up a existing project, but I'll show you the basics of it, because remember, there's only really a couple of things you have to think through. One is the app host project. That's the project you now launch, one project that you launch. And in there, you just build out in the program.cs the things that your project you want launched. So you want your cache launched, you want your API launched, you want your front end launched, and then what do they depend on? And what do they have as far as, do they have health checks? With all of that done, the only other thing to do is add the service defaults project, which has these extensions, which for the most part, these extensions could probably stay just as they are, or you can start to implement these things in your application directly and not have to even depend on the service defaults. The service defaults are there because Well, they're the defaults, right? You probably don't have tracing installed and set up and all the rest, or maybe you do. And if you do, you don't need to do the tracing here. But this allows you to set up open telemetry and health checks. And then the big one here, though, is service discovery. So service discovery is what allows you to look for, where is it here? It is in app host where you say like web front end or API service or cache. You can reference by those strings. And yes, don't freak out, they're strings, not a big deal. This is for local development. But that app discovery allows us to, or service discovery allows us to discover our various pieces without having to know, oh, that's on port, localhost 7599 or whatever it was. This allows you to wire up these things. This can be by default. Just toss this in with all these defaults, and it's going to make all of your applications better as far as logging, telemetry, health checks, etc. But it'll also give you an idea of, hey, these are things we can add to make our application even better, like tracing. Okay, all this in here, all this is documented. So these two projects you add, and then for your other projects, you just add a reference to that service defaults project. Okay, and then when you do that in program.cs, you'll see add service defaults. There you go. So that's now wired up those service defaults. Now you can ask for those things down here as well. You'll see the add service defaults. This is because we actually are using Redis in this front end. So it's not part of Aspire, but it does use the service discovery of Aspire. But then down here, we're using service discovery again for the API service. That's all we need to do. We don't have to worry about setting up connection strings and all the rest and making sure they work locally and then trying to pass those around to other people. So that's what you do essentially to wire up any existing project. Now, there's some tweaks in existing projects you can do to make things even better, but the basics are very straightforward. There are articles online how to do it as well. But again, if you want to see that, you can leave a comment down below and just say, hey, I'd love to see the wire up an existing project. I'll probably do this anyway, but it's good to know how many people are interested in that. So that's Aspire, right? Aspire is fairly awesome. Now, let's talk about the things that it is starting to do, but maybe people expect it to do. One of the things is deployment. Everyone wants Aspire to deploy. There is starting to be more and more things that it does deploy to. This was not the original intention of Aspire. Aspire was meant to be for local development, for local developers who are trying to be faster and better about discovering what their application is doing and why. And it does that really, really well. That's the whole purpose of it was that. Now, there are other things that come out of that. We were like, oh, I'd love to do this. I'd love to do that. For example, super easy to set up Redis, right? We just said in our app host, we said, give me a Redis, right? Which, by the way, that's a NuGet package. So right here, aspire.hosting.redis. You add that, and then you add the add Redis with this name, and it takes care of all the rest. We're good to go. There is one thing in the manage user secrets. It adds the cache password here, similar to the OTLP API key. But it adds that password, which that's for just local development. But it makes things pretty easy to do. And so people have said, well, this replaces the need for manually setting up Docker containers or doing, any type of orchestration with Docker or, goodness, please don't do local Kubernetes. But, that kind of replaces all this stuff. Can we just make this, you say, hey, I already have this Aspire project. Just go ahead and deploy this whole thing. Like figure out how to wire these things up in Azure. And there's things that are starting to happen that direction. So you can deploy to, I believe, Azure Container Apps and a few others right now. And they're continuing to add those things. And of course, this is an open source project people can contribute to and allow for more things to be done. That's deployment. Now, again, that idea of deploying the dashboard itself, not a wise idea. That's not what it's set up for. That's, this is for local development, to make local development easier. Doing this in production would require a whole different thing, but that's where you have your existing systems for, logging your structured logs and handling your trace statements and all the rest. That should be somewhere else. That should be in, in Azure or another system, like so. Another question to be asked is, hey, this only works with C# projects, huh? No, it doesn't. If you want to add an NPM project or Node project, or if you want to add in a Python project or whatever, this will work with that. So it's not just a, Microsoft thing for Microsoft things only, because they understand that, you might have an API project, but you might have also then an Angular React project for your front end. This can handle that. So it's not just for C# projects. So that's Aspire. That's why I would highly recommend you understand how to use it. It will make you better as a developer. It will make you faster. It will make you more aware of what's going on in your project. This dashboard right here is full of gold, right? It's got so much stuff in here. It allows you to understand better what's going on and why, where there's problems, how to track down those problems, how to look at, what's going on in your system, how to understand, what's happening on your various project types. All this stuff is really valuable. You can figure out how fast your application is running now in development, and see, hey, I made that change and it made things slower or faster. This gives you all that information. So it's a really great development tool for making better applications faster, and understanding what's happening inside of them. So I'd highly encourage you to learn how to use Aspire, learn how to work with it, learn how to add it to your existing projects, and learn how to use it in your new projects as well. For my new projects that we're doing in-house, we're using Aspire for all of our new projects because it's that valuable, because it's that important, because it makes our lives easier as developers. Easier is faster. Faster is better. Better is our bosses are happier. Whoever our bosses are, and in this case, it's probably you or my boss. So this is super valuable. I encourage you to check it out. I encourage you to start playing with it. Make sure you have the latest bits. Again, 9.5 is the latest versions. You might have to upgrade that. I'll put the link down in the description to that page. Again, if you want the source code for this, then go ahead and use the link in the description. There's a link to the source code there as well. If you have any questions, let me know. I'd love to answer your questions. And yes, we'll be doing more Aspire content. It might even involve a full Aspire course, depending on how interested you are in that, and doing a lot more with it. So, but either way, there'll be more free content on Aspire, especially as .NET 10 comes out, even more good stuff comes out. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.